Hello there, and welcome to the Right to Read Initiative. My name is Dr. Kathryn Garforth from Garforth Education, and today I'm excited to welcome back Jeremiah Short. And you are from Texas at the moment?
Yes.
And, you are a teacher. We talked about your journey in a previous episode, and today we're focusing on in your classroom and how you work on creating phenomenal students. I'm sure all students are phenomenal, but there's things that we can do to really help them meet their potential. So why don't you give listeners just a quick refresher of who you are, how you came to teaching, and how we got from, was it the greatest student to the
greatness wrong to the phenomenal wrong.
Yeah.
My name is Jeremiah Short. I'm going into my 10th year in education, but my 8th year as a classroom teacher. I spent the last 2 years as a reading interventionist. I've taught students from a variety of backgrounds, which has kind of enhanced my practice. And I kind of have an insane drive to kind of want to see students be successful, because I spent a little time in my life actually not probably doing what I should have been doing. So now at this place now where I want to see all students become phenomenal.
Awesome. So you've done the primary grades, and you've done the intermediate grades, and you've done the intervention role. How do you feel that has influenced who you are as a teacher today?
I see everything. As I spoke about yesterday, working second grade is when I really started to learn to teach reading. Because doing 4th and 5th grade, you kind of start seeing kids when they're already a bit fully formed. They don't have as many foundational issues. Now you have some that do, but not as many. Honestly, a lot of times those kids are in special education, whether it's on the dyslexia umbrella or in special education in general. So sometimes you're not even the one remediating with those students during your RTI time. So I didn't get a chance to see it as much, at least not enough of it, where it was something forced me to kind of change my practice. But working in those variety of roles, you kind of get to see it all. You work second grade, you kind of get to see them at the baby stage where they still are a little needy. But I guess that's the reading to learn stage where they're starting. So they come with a variety of skills in second grade. Third grade, having a chance to work that grade level, even though it was for half a year both times, it was kind of, they're still kind of coming from second grade, so they're still a little babyish. They're not used to taking tests. And then the year I taught third grade, it was during the middle of COVID, coming out of that. So I probably didn't get a full picture of that because I didn't teach the full year. But upper grades is you see more of the comprehension, fluency, high-level vocabulary. So you get to see kind of a range. So I think working all of them, you kind of get, as a second grade teacher, having worked upper grade, you kind of know where they're going. But also if you work upper grade, having worked in lower grades, you know what gaps they may still have. So you kind of get to see both. So I understand why people say, really, especially if you're becoming a principal or something like that at some point, it's good to work all the levels because you kind of get to see where they're coming from. Because when I first started my career, I was an upper grade teacher, and you can tell the difference between an upper grade teacher and a lower grade teacher. Lower grade teachers all know performance doesn't matter. And then upper grade teachers like performance is the only thing that matters. So it's kind of like a mindset. So you kind of get to see where both are coming from. So it kind of enables you to be able to help everyone instead of just a set group of people.
Definitely. So if we were to walk into your grade 4 classroom that first year, what would we have seen?
That first year? Probably like doing a lot of test taking strategies, because that's pretty much, I don't think as far as like literacy practices or anything like that, I probably wasn't too heavy with those. The only thing I probably did that was probably good practices, and I learned from my literacy coach doing like core reading and things like that. But a lot of it was really like test taking strategies and things like that, because we were really a bit more on that. So my first year, that's all I knew. And even early in the year, we just did a lot of, like I told you yesterday, PowerPoints, things like that. So it wasn't high level stuff. I just was really good at motivating and getting them to want to do stuff, but I didn't know how to really teach reading or anything at that point.
Right. And you were fortunate enough to have these students for a second year and follow them to grade 5.
Yes.
How did your classroom change with the learning that you did over the summer?
I think the two things shifted going into that year, one, having that same group of kids. And I even said that was one of my things. I wanted them to have a full Mr. Short, because I did kind of turn the switch toward the end of my first year. But one of the things I put a heavy focus on was fluency, because I know we had an iStation, and I looked at their iStation data, and they all were like tier 3 in fluency. I didn't know much about fluency at that time, but I just knew a lot of my students were tier 3. And so I was like, we're going to put a heavy focus on fluency. So even when new students came to the classroom, I almost was like, that was like the Walking Dead question. We would find out where their fluency was at. So I put a heavy focus on that, did a lot of fluency. I did actually probably around mid-year start doing, because what I noticed, of course, we were bigger on test taking strategy. My kids were bigger with the big TEKS, as we call them here in Texas, the big standards or skills like inferencing and making connections. But a lot of them were very poor in like the smaller skills that you might only test once. So I was like, okay, I need to engage in more explicit teaching of those skills. And excuse me, I'm watching close. So I apologize for that. But I put a heavier focus on, that explicit teaching mid-year, and it actually yielded pretty high results. That was part of the reason for that. Like I said, I did article a day, and then I would do like core response and echo reading and things like that. So I was starting to kind of do some good stuff. It was a fifth grade classroom as well. So it wasn't as high level I would have liked, and even especially with the vocabulary. So that was some things I wish I could have got better at, but for the most part, I got them there. They did end up performing at a high level.
Mm-hmm. Now, early on, I guess we didn't mention this about your first classroom. You had a name for it. And I think that really helped build that growth mindset, mm-hmm. and trying to really train your students out of that fixed mindset.
Mm-hmm. So my first room, like I said, it was called the Greatness Room. And like I said, I just made the whole thing. My sister did the board for me. And one of the things, I made it a big deal the first week or early on. I said, we can't even use the word good in here. You can't even say the word good. Everything has to be great. And I said, if I don't use the word great, I owe you like a lunch or something that I will eat with them. It was like little silly stuff like that. And then even one of my very first reflections from that year the first reflection was, I am great. Like one of my students was writing on one of his reflections, and he wrote that I am great. So it really got into their system about that. And then I did a lot of other motivational things too that kind of went with that, because I was very heavy on motivation that year. So that was kind of like the thing. So it kind of built into that. And like, oddly enough, going into that next year, it was the phenomenal room. So we shifted to the phenomenal room, and the actual board, which is down somewhere in the garage, but I have the actual goal was 100% pass rate on the STAR assessment, which at the time, I'm a second year teacher. I didn't realize that's that's some lofty goals, obviously, for a second year teacher. I mean, they got 91% and actually did pretty good in math too. But it really set an expectation level. Like one of the cooler anecdotes from that year was a student, like I would do like math exit tickets. And so we did those every day. And I know this one particular day, only one student missed the exit ticket. And one of the students went like, who missed? I was like, what the word? I was like, wow. Like, so they really were buying into it. And then a new student came to the classroom. I was talking to her mother at one of our Christmas parties or holiday parties. And I was telling her, like, well, if the kids get 100%, we're going to have a big party. And then one of my students is not ill, but when. I was like, okay. Actually, I made a whole reflection on that. I was like, wow, they really, I mean, of course you say this stuff, you're hoping kids really buy into it, but they really did. So that part, encouraging them, because I told them it isn't just about being phenomenal in your performance, it's being phenomenal in everything. Because I had a student who was one of those troublemakers who got kicked out of multiple schools, and he was somehow his behavior got better. I'm like, that's good, but you need to perform too. Like, it ain't just about behaving. I'm like, you're supposed to behave. You're supposed to actually do that. So it was about everything that you do. Like I said, I had multiple students that got into the magnet school. So I was very proud of that. And like I said, many of them still doing well. So that's kind of the main thing. It isn't just about the academic piece. It's about growing as a human as well. Because I had a student who actually got a 100 on both of her STAR tests. She was already GT, had made 90s the previous year. And she wrote in one of her reflections that she got better behaviorally, academically, and socially that year. I was like, what? Improve a student like that wasn't a troublemaker and made high performance, but she felt that she got better. So that was one of the bigger compliments I've gotten.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So after that grade 4 and grade 5 with the same class, you jumped down to grade 2.
Well, that was after my 4th year. So my 3rd year, I went to a new school, and then it was after my 3rd year, I went down to 2nd.
All right. Got a little chronologically messed up a little bit, but when you went down to that 2nd grade level, what were you thinking going in? Did you feel prepared for teaching reading?
I want to say reading, I felt okay as far as like the comprehension piece. It's just I probably wasn't prepared for the range that those kids were going to have. Because going into a second grade classroom, I mean, you got kids that, like I told you about the one that couldn't code or spell, so you got that. And you got the kids who have good comprehension, but no phonics aren't there. And then you got those with high comprehension, and they may have other gaps like spelling or something like that. And then you have kids who are pretty complete for the most part. So it's kind of, you got a wide range. So that was kind of one of those things. So I had to, oddly enough, that year I kind of merged structured and balanced literacy components, because we did have a guided reading time. And then I had a time where I did explicit teaching of comprehension stuff. So I did both. And so I would do guided reading with certain students. I do feel like with that small group component, some students you might do phonics, some students you might do guided reading, some you might do higher order comprehension. So I kind of mixed it up that way doing second grade. So working that grade level. So the students were successful because I kind of mixed it up a little bit, high, medium, low, however you want to phrase it. And working second grade, like I said, that is when I started really to enhance my practice, and I started seeing everything, not just, I would say the reading rope expanded for me. So I went from fluency, a little bit of vocabulary and comprehension to probably not phonemic awareness as much. I still was kind of like still developing. I developed that more as I became an interventionist, but phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension, and you put them all together for second grade is definitely where all of them kind of interweave with each other. So that's was the grade level with a reading rope, I think really kind of expanded for me.
Right. Now, how were you approaching teaching these skills?
So, I mean, I guess some stuff like I wrote up as far as the literacy block. So say, for example, this is the time I created word study for it, because I don't believe in doing any of those skills in isolation. And even a lot of the research shows you're actually supposed to mix vocabulary, phonics, phonological awareness. So I created this structure called word power. So every day, instead of say doing 2 days of phonological awareness, 2 days of phonics, 2 days of vocabulary or something to that effect, I did them all in one day. And no, a lot of people say, how do you do them all in one day? But I was able to, when I move at a hyper speed, I've learned that now later in my career, that I actually move a little bit faster than most people, but the students tend to be able to keep up because I move at that speed at all times. But you're going to get a dose of phonological awareness, you're going to get phonics, and you're going to get vocabulary all. So say like I might be teaching long A, you're going to learn with the word, how to say the word. And then, or now I was doing intervention, saying the sound, then the word, then you might underline the pattern. And then I'll do vocab trailers, which a great lady, Joanne Billingsley, it's a routine that she uses to reinforce where they would actually have to say the words in context. And then you move through those progressions as the week goes on, because it's all built according to Bloom's taxonomy. And you use a series of exercises which build toward really my biggest day is the fourth day, where they do conversations, where they go around and engage in higher order thinking using the words. And then the fifth day, I give them a quiz, like a context clue quiz, where they use a story. So it's embedded within that. So, like I said, that yielded high income outcomes. So I've used it ever since then in interventions and in the classroom. So next year, I'm looking forward to being able to fully flesh that out over a full year with a proper scope and sequence. So that would be how I teach all three of those. Like I said, I don't do any of them in isolation. I've heard people say do vocabulary that way, but at the same time, I believe in doing all three together because I feel it fits a little better that way.
For sure. So you mentioned Bloom's taxonomy. Can you describe it to listeners who aren't necessarily familiar with it or at a point where they can oh yeah, Bloom's taxonomy is yada, yada, yada?
So Bloom's taxonomy is a rigor matrix. I actually went and got one of the actual research from like 1962, about a couple of years ago, even though I already was kind of studying the actual original study on Bloom's, but it's 6 stages that you go through. So you have identify, which is the lowest level where you just identify something. The second level is comprehension. The third level is apply. So you apply it to a real life situation or a new situation. The fourth is analyze. The fifth is evaluate. Like, do you agree? Or, just like people doing movie reviews, it's kind of like that type of thing. And then the sixth level is synthesized. Now, sometimes it's flipped. I think creating and synthesizing sometimes flip with some people, but it follows that rigor matrix. So everything that I do is structured according to that, whether it's my word study, whether it's my reading comprehension or my writing, everything is structured according to that matrix throughout the week. Because one thing I hate is short weeks. As a teacher, I hate short weeks. I've always preferred 5-day weeks because it makes it a little easier for me. That fifth day, I can do that quiz or whatever exercise that kind of completes the week. So it kind of throws me off when I don't have full weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Would you also prefer a year-round school or the traditional school year?
I think we should condense the summer months. I don't know. I think you do need that time off because you have staffing issues, like as a principal or, in those roles that you do have staffing things. People have to move. You have to change out personnel. So you do need some time in the summer. So if you do year round, I mean, when is that going to take place? And then teachers do need time to enhance their practice. I don't think you need a full 2-3 months because summer school is every kid doesn't go to summer school. So it's kind of like, does it have the effect that it should have? So I don't think you necessarily should have year-round school, but I definitely think you don't need 3 months off. Like, I think that's a little excessive. I say 6 weeks, 2 months at the most, but really I think 6 weeks would be enough. You can get all your staffing stuff done. Maybe you have to condense the transition. I mean, of course you have staffing stuff, so that's kind of the thing, but a lot of school districts don't even do heavy PD. And I think a lot of that can be condensed anyway. And then you won't have any need for summer school. You make sure kids get quality instruction the whole year round. Maybe you can put state testing back as well. So there's a lot of things I think that could benefit from having a shorter summer. I mean, I personally don't like short summer months. Like, we're about a month into it now. And I'm like, man, I think I'll be ready 2 weeks from now to go back in there. But I think like that would be the only thing I would say, like, condense the summer months. Because 3 months in some cases is a little too long.
Yeah, I guess it all depends where you are. Like right now, my kid's last day of school isn't until Thursday.
Wow.
June 29th, and we go back the first week of September. So it's 2 months.
Yes, that's kind of
year-round schooling in Canada. You go to school for 3 months, have a month off, go to school for 3 months, have a month off.
Mm-hmm.
So it distributes the time off more evenly throughout the year.
Yeah, even I don't know if a full month off is, I guess I see why people do it. And you essentially have a lot of time off during Christmas, and around that Thanksgiving time, you have about 3 weeks for the most part within a short time span. But I don't like kids having too much time off. I think that could be very detrimental. So I think but at the same time, you still have a certain number of days. But they always talk about teaching the content and not worrying about testing. If you had more days, then you have to worry about that. You really could focus on just teaching the kids, and because it does seem like you don't have enough time to teach all the things that you need to teach them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so COVID hit, and that changed everybody's reality and what they were able to do with this sudden influx of time on their hands. Mm-hmm. How did that affect you and your teaching?
Well, it didn't hit into the end of the school year for me as far as like with the teaching aspect. I was still in the classroom teaching second grade. That was the year I taught second grade. So I would do virtual, and they didn't want us teaching certain stuff, but I would still try to meet with kids one-on-one for tutoring, and I would meet with them every day. So I kind of adjusted some of the things I would do. You tried to become more virtual, and I felt like that went okay. It went pretty good considering the time. Because I mean, I'm very structured. Like they say, I'm the teacher meme. I'm the teacher that's already got assessments ready and things like that. When stuff, I'm like that teacher. So I was like, man, let's adjust. Let's get to it. But then next year was pretty challenging working at a charter school when you're having to do blended learning. You know, I got some kids online and some kids in person. That was the most frustrating thing ever in life. I would never want to do that again. So it's because I am more of an in-person teacher. I'm not a big fan. I don't even like virtual trainings most time. I like the in-person aspect. Because the reason I like trainings that are not in person, because you can learn from the people there. Virtually, you don't always get a chance to do that unless they're breakout sessions. And with teaching, it's very difficult. I feel like it's still better. Like you can read a student a lot better in person. Obviously, people talk about kids having their cameras on, different things like that. But even if it's on, there's certain things that you just can't do when you're not there with them. It's just certain things that you can make sure of that they're on their task doing certain things. So it affected. I didn't get a chance to experience it as much, but I definitely know I definitely wouldn't want to teach the full year dealing with virtual teaching and all that. That's very frustrating. So
definitely. But you mentioned that you did a lot of learning during this time too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I said, the research and really enhancing my practice. So now, like I tell people what I'm excited about for next year, it's going into my 8th year and really probably my 7th full year teaching is before I kind of was going into the classroom, I was starting to figure some things out and I was able to get high performance and I was good at structure. Now, every component of what I'm doing in my literacy block, I know what I'm doing. I know why it's effective and why I'm doing it. Before, I don't think that was the case. Now I'm going in, especially working as an interventionist. I kind of already have that lowest common denominator in mind when I'm doing every lesson. And honestly, I'm the type of person, I can pull my own kids. I don't really need somebody to pull my kids. So I know how to effectively do small groups. I know how to structure my blog. So say like for next year, I know I just messaged my principal yesterday about how they're going to do class schedules, because then you know when they're going to pull out for large group, when you're going to do lunch, recess, which, I mean, in a sense, it's not that big a deal, but you still want to know how you might have to move some stuff around as what order it goes in when you do it. So say like, for example, next year, I always like to start with word study and I'm be self-contained, because I like starting the week doing word power. I stand on the table, I do all this stuff. So it brings the energy. So, and then vocabulary goes into everything. And then you go with reading, because again, it's going to be explicit. I know to be explicit, and I know the progression that I need to go according to when I'm teaching reading. And then it folds into writing, because in Texas, there's no point to do traditional prompts anymore. So with writing, where like you're going to do more reader's response, extended constructive response, it's going to be in response to the reading, which in reality, in the real world, most of the time when you're writing columns or anything like that, it's going to be a response to a real life event. So I feel like it's the proper way to do it anyway, but that doesn't mean that you don't do some writing prompts. So one of the things I like to do, so say, for example, I'm doing text structure, I have the kids write a text structure, for their synthesized. And then say for author's purpose, they can write as well, or they can sit there and perform an author's purpose or a commercial or do an advertisement or something like that. So you can kind of put them both together and make it where they go together, instead of just doing rote writing where you just respond to some prompt like, tell me about your favorite day, which is okay, I guess. But you can actually mix that stuff in with the stuff that you're doing in reading, which is a lot of times what I do. So that's, like I said, I'm excited about next year and then even with the background information, you can't explicitly teach, say, social studies in a lot of districts, including mine. So you got to find a way to kind of mix that in the right way. So whether it's through your read aloud or I'm self-contained, so it's a little easier for me. So I can find that time where you can build that background knowledge intentionally, instead of just having to always pre-teach it before you teach something, which I do anyway. But you want to find that time where you can build those kids background knowledge where they know about the world. What is World War I? What is World War II? What is the Civil War? What are these things? So these kids know the world that they're living in.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Now, you were talking about word studies. Can you give us kind of an example of what that would look like and how you would do it throughout the week?
Well, throughout the week, like I said, I kind of explained a little bit earlier as far as my word power routine. But so, for example, the second day, I might go tap it out. So I even got one here, I think, right in front of me. I could just use one of these. So, pulling up the viewers. Okay, sorry. So it'd be like a point or a pointed, or that would be like the second day, like teaching the kids how to tap out the word and do the syllabification type thing. And then I might have them sort the words. So if it's diphthongs, O-I, O-Y, or something like that, they might sort that. And since it's fifth grade, I might just combine some of the diphthongs together, like the owl sound. So you'll combine those together and you will sort those. And then they might do picture this. So that'd be them drawing a pictorial representation of certain words within that cycle. So I do use the same words, but it's not the traditional spelling list, because we don't spell them at the end of the week. But what I do on the third day, and one of the things I started doing when I taught third grade, first I do phenomenal manipulation where I add phonemes, or now with fifth grade, I would do more morphemes, delete, substitute, and then I would link them all together and ask the kids, what are you doing when you're going from word to word? Are you substituting? Are you deleting? Are you adding? So I would do that. And then I would do, say, guided spelling. So I would call the word out, and then the kids would spell, and I walk around and kind of see where the misconceptions are. And that's a good way too. I would make sure the kids don't erase the word. And at the end, I kind of can tell, okay, they got 7 out of 10, 5 out of 10, 3 out of 10, who's struggling, who's mastering the concept. So it's not like a traditional spelling test, but it's kind of guided where I kind of can see whether or not they're mastering it. And then the fourth day, I would do what I call conversations, where they would go around and actually go in stations and actually answer questions. And then the fifth day, I give them a quiz. And then they also, which they typically do pretty quick after a while, there's only 5 words, fill in the blank. And then they would actually do a synthesize where I give them all the words, and they would have to actually write a story, or say, once I teach info text, they can write an info text, they can do a drama, they can do a persuasive text at a certain point in the year after I teach them that skill in reading. So a lot of times I start kind of putting in reading and other skills within it So say, for example, a lot of times I reinforce setting through vocab trailers. I ask them, where are they? Oh, they at the park, this. And the kids are naturally start doing it. Like I don't have to ask them. They'll just start saying it just on cue. So it's like little things like that. So it does build in those other subjects while studying the words.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So listeners may not know this if they didn't watch the first episode that we did together, but you actually came to teaching through a writing background.
Yes. Yes,
writing is a passion of yours, and you have expertise in it, knowledge in it.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that changes your approach to teaching than someone who doesn't have that same background? Because with being a professional writer at one point in life, you obviously had to have a better understanding of the written language than, say, someone who just did it throughout school.
Mm-hmm. So, and oddly enough, I actually was pretty good in school, even with the writing stuff. So it comes natural to me because everybody in my family is a natural ELA teacher, all that good stuff. So, but I think it's a couple things. One, I don't mind doing lesson plans because I don't mind writing. And I think rough draft and draft and everything, because even now, here I write everything down in a notebook. Even the article I just wrote, I write everything down before. So I go through the traditional writer process before I even write things. Some people just get on the computer and type whatever, but I write everything down and then I type it. So some people might be like, I put some out and they're like, oh man, you just did that? I'm like, no, I've been working on it for like weeks. I've been writing it in a notebook or something. Like I got so many notebooks. One of my friends told me I should just scan all my stuff and just have the notes somewhere because I have notebooks back for years. So I still always click like a writer. I do my lesson plans that way. I work on them for a while, and I just type them up in one day. I'm like, man, you did all those in one day? I'm like, no, I've been working on this week. So anyway, so I click like that. So I don't mind doing lesson plans. Obviously, I can do articles and things of that nature. Also, like I said, I think rough draft, final draft. So even when it comes to criticism or feedback, I know how to take that in and then turn it into essentially a final draft. And then going with that in the classroom, as somebody who going with the writing piece, I actually know how to do interviewing things. So obviously doing the podcast, but at the same time, I know how to ask questions and create questions. That comes natural to me. I pretty much create all my own questions. So I might use a passage from, say, a trade book, whatever you want to call them, and then I can just write questions off of that. So it gives me more material to go from. It's not like, oh, I just see something in a book and I just go off of it. I normally don't even use their stuff. I might use a few questions, then I create my own, and that's you can create those higher order questions. Going with that, like I said, when you're talking to people, obviously, like when you're interviewing people, of course, you're supposed to smile. You're supposed to meet them. It's kind of like when, like, we see, like, on TV, when you see analysts and people like that, you might say athletes like a Shaq or something like that. People never notice that those people are always at the same eye level. It's like little small things you just know from doing communication. Of course, to always smile. And so, like, I had one student this year. I actually never worked with her officially, but she was really short. So I know to get down on one knee and talk to her and be at her eye level when I'm talking to her. So it's like little small things like that. You just pick up those natural communication skills. So it's helped me as a teacher because I know naturally to do those things. So, and it's funny, like a lot of adults that I work with, they think I'm very serious, which I kind of can be with adults. But because they're like, oh, there's no way you get on these interviews or you go to these places and I'll be like, knowing how to smile. And I'm like, I know how to do this stuff. It's just because with the kids, they love me. They love how I kind of know how to interact naturally and things like that. But, sometimes with adults, I can't be super serious. So I know how to do these things naturally because I not only, like I said, is the writing background, it's the communication background because I was a sports communication major. So I went through that training and had a chance to kind of experience it a little bit. And I know how to do that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And do you find that when you're teaching that writing process to the students, you explain your own process and letting them know that, a first draft is exactly that, a draft, and there's room for improvement and ways to work on that, not necessarily in a writer's workshop mentality, teaching them the writing process, and you're not expected to have it perfect the first time you do it?
Well, it's so hard because even when I taught second grade, I couldn't even really do it the way I wanted to because a lot of their stuff isn't even legible. So I can't even do it the same way. But I think particularly when I taught fourth grade, my third year, because my second year, I didn't get into that, but let's say my principal was focused on reading and math. Let us say that. So we didn't teach it as much. But my first year, I was learning, and then it's still expectations they have for the state test here. So it's not the same as what I would do, because I'm very creative. I'm a creative writer. So that's more like how I like to write. So academic writing is something still not that's natural to me. So you have to learn what the expectation is. But I will say with my students, I tend to be a tough grade too. I mean, I'll be like a student will come to me sometimes, you want to give them feedback. I was like, hey, that's not good enough. You just redo all of it. And I know it might sound a little mean, but I am pretty tough when it comes to the writing. So it's very rare a student's just gonna get a 100 in my writing block. And now even in my district, you kind of got to do both together. But I will say one of the things I learned to not do is some people say don't do the red pen. And I learned not to do that. So a lot of times students will come to me with their writing. One of the things I am big on is structure. So I tell them don't, because a lot of teachers, they just tell them indent. I don't like that. So I tell them, write your intro, skip a line, write your next body paragraph, skip a line, have a complete thought, because that's how real writing is. So you need to have people time to process what they're saying, but when you write it all together, it kind of makes it hard for them to process what they're reading. So that is one thing I do teach them. And actually some of my kids actually know how to put things in parentheses. So they actually do that sometimes when they write. Even my earlier kids, when I still was learning how to teach writing. So I do go through that process with them. And then, like I said, I just tell them what they need to correct. I don't do the red pen. I say, hey, go correct this part or do this, and then they go do it. So I don't do the red pen, but I do explain to them my process of writing. And again, that's one of the things I'm excited about next year is being able to really teach, because in Texas now, they have to have writing in each grade level on the STAR test or the state assessment. So you essentially have to teach writing. So being able to teach them that, even if you're doing a reader's response, teach them that structure. And even when I taught third grade, I guess you would say we're still technically in this particular school year, last school year, my kids actually were very fluent writers. I didn't get to the point where I really could get them structure-wise where I wanted them, but they were very fluent because I actually embedded writing in everything. So it was in word study, it was in reading, and even in writing, I embedded reading. So I was starting to do a lot of cross-curricular stuff that year. But at the end of the day, you make them fluent writers, then it makes it easy to be able to correct things. But even now, you put everything on a computer. So that's one element too. I guess I'm gonna have to adjust to next year, that a lot of the stuff the kids have to type in instead of writing it.
For sure. Now, do you weave in the comprehension instruction when you're doing the writing? Because that's where, when we're looking at that syntax and semantics and understanding language, do you find that to be helpful to work into their writing and their reading at the same time?
Yes. One of the things I'll tell people, I know somebody actually commented on Twitter, what did I mean by front load grammar? Because I don't believe in, say with writing instruction that you should write every day. I feel like you should go ahead and front load grammar the first 2 days, teach them that, and then start embedding that grammar instruction into writing that third, fourth, and fifth day. As far as with the writing, you start that third day. But by the time, a lot of times by the fourth day, a lot of my kids are writing a lot. They were writing word study. They're writing and reading, because I normally do analyzing on the fourth day. So they would just write about reading, I guess what people call it. So all of that is reader's response or extended constructive response in some cases. And then, of course, they would revise and edit in their writing. And then on my fifth day of the week, a lot of times they would do some type of exercise in reading where they have to write some type of composition. And then in word study, they would have to do it. So a lot of times they've written 4 or 5 long things at some point in the week that you can look at and analyze and correct, instead of just working on one piece of writing or just working on some rote. They've done it in everything. So a lot of times I use that that's why I do it in all the subjects. So you can use that to reinforce. And it's a high effect size to write about reading too. So the kids hate it now. I did text analysis, even in interventions, I would do it. And the kids hated it because it would really force them to actually come up with an answer that isn't already presented to them. So, but it really does force kids to think critically. And I'm pretty sneaky. A lot of people don't realize, I say, I give types to kids. The kids love the types. So I don't give anything for behavior at all. So, but I will give types to say if the kids give a great answer, I might even say, hey, this might be a typey answer. It'll force them to work a little harder and give a great response because they know they might get types in response. So I know how to use external motivation when it's correct. So I know how to do that. So, because they will work a little harder to give that great response if they know they might get types in return. So,
of course. Now, let's fast forward to this fall when you're starting out with a new class. What's that going to look like?
A lot of the things I just explained, but one of the things I'm going to be very heavy on is building their background knowledge. So I'm going to make sure I maximize that time. to do that, to build that background knowledge, because we have some students in my school that they're still a tick behind. They dealt with COVID and a lot of things that hadn't really went well for them. So one of the things I want to make sure I do is make sure I build that background knowledge, build a vocabulary, make sure they're proficient writers, and then just make them critical thinkers. So I'm going to structure my block that way. I've already been planning. I found out in the middle of April that I was going to be teaching fifth grade self-contained, which is a big deal here in Texas. So essentially, every subject you teach is going to have something to do with the state assessment. So not just because even so in Texas, the reading and writing are on the same assessment. And then in fifth grade, you have science and math are their own individual state assessment. So I'm going to teach 3 testing subjects, which is kind of a big deal. But essentially, social studies is embedded. And then, of course, word study, because you have vocabulary questions on the state assessment. So essentially, everything that I teach is going to have something to do with the state assessment. So that's going to be very important to me. So one of the things, mainly what I'm going to try to do is embed literacy in everything throughout the day. So I'm going to make the classroom a whole experience. I'm excited to get back in there and try a few things out. It's also about making it a whole experience, and then also implementing my whole day intervention model. Because I don't look at, and we don't even call ours RTI, but I don't look at it as just RTI is the only time that you do intervention. Everything is built that way. So I screen kids at the beginning of the year for all, I guess I'd never heard of the term 5 pillars until the last year or so, but I just know the 5 components according to the reading panel. So I screen them for phonological awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, comprehension, and then I build their interventions based off of that. So it'll be a whole day thing where what they're doing at home, what they're doing during RTI time, and then if there's another time, maybe morning, just depending, because you have to do 45 here in Texas, where if a kid failed the STAR test or the state assessment, they have to get pulled during that time. So I have to adjust because of that. But I built everything based around that. So it isn't just the whole group instruction. The intervention model is based off of what those kids' needs are. And I differentiated it because according to that child, because there are kids who can decode, their vocabulary is good, but they can't spell. So that'll be what their focus is on. So I like to double up. So I might give them a workbook at home, and then they'll do spelling in the morning when they come in, because the kids know they're in my classroom. They're going to come in at 8:25, which my school is a late school, and they're going to work from 8:25 until 4 or 5 when we get off, when we get done, when the bell rings.
Well, that sounds great. Now, you do have a book. Let me just open sorry, I can't remember the title. It is A Phenomenal Intervention, the Playbook.
Great.
So can you, you call it a manual to serve as a guide, not a script, for reading teachers, interventionists, and resource teachers, looking at progressions, components, and appendices. Can you give us a little bit more insight to what exactly that looks like and how someone would use it in their classroom going forward?
Well, of course, a lot of you look at, of course, based around reading levels, but obviously that's going to the wayside, probably to the pleasure of a lot of people. And which I always tell people I don't have a problem with reading levels as long as they're accurate. A lot of times they're not. So a lot of times I know working in schools that a lot of times it seems like some kids always go from A to D by a certain point. I'm like, wow, they went up just one reading level each time. Like I just don't know about that. So there's a lot of things like that. So if it's accurate, it's fair. But if it's not, I say the best metric I think to use is probably map testing. And then honestly, a lot of and we use M-Class here and take, at least in my district we do. You have M-Class, you have TPR, you have other metrics that should attest to other foundational components. So they should all go together. So essentially, you might start a kid at a certain level. So say like you use it like Lexile level, and then you look at what skills should they know at this stage. And if you've pre-screened them and tested them, you should know that. And you just start there and build and teach those skills. The reason I call it a guide, because I don't want people saying you got to do this particular resource. For one, you might not have that resource. You might use something else in your district. I don't want anybody thinking they got to use something different. Now I have my own stuff. Like if people want to use, fine. And I use my own stuff. So say like I use word power, things like that. So you can use whatever you have and just teach. So if you need to teach long A or long I or something like that, you can use whatever resource you have. So you go off of that. And then, so say for example, from A to probably J, a lot of the focus is on phonics or a systematic scope and sequence. And then eventually it builds toward you doing all the components together, where you're doing word study, fluency, comprehension. But the heavier focus in the earlier stages is phonics, which it should be anyway. Then eventually you move more into morphology and then comprehension. So it really is a progression. And it does work. Like I've taken third graders who were reading at H's and they were O's by the end of the year in a 20-week cycle. So, and I had several kids they go from I's to P's. A student this year, after screening her comprehension was good. Her vocabulary actually was good. And I was like, she shouldn't even be behind. But I saw that her fluency was like 43 words per minute at the beginning of the year, having her interventions. So I was like, okay, she just needs fluency. So I was giving her and other students fluency passages, and she actually was doing them at home as well, that repeated reading. So that girl, by the middle of the year, she went from 43 words per minute to 126 words per minute. And so she went from a level O to a level T. And she actually she already was doing pretty good on assessment, so she started doing even better. So just that little intervention took her from an O to a T. So a lot of it is built within my intervention structure. It's still built around screening kids. And then some of it you can still differentiate on your own as to what you do. Because I have templates and stuff you can use, and it can be individualized. But there are points I will individualize. So I have 3 parts. I have kind of initial, like the warm-up work they come in and do. Then they have the core intervention, which is 20 minutes, which I feel I can do most of what I need to do in that time. And then they have kind of a closing out activity if we have time, which a lot of times will be fluency or something like that. But there is one group, even this year, I differentiated what they did at the end based off what they individually need, because all of them, they were all over the place. So I kind of was like, okay, you need spelling, you need fluency, you need this, you need this. So that's what they all did. So, and I did it within that 30-minute cycle. And even my principal would come in and how I didn't waste any time, which I did. And I was like, as soon as they come in, they get to work.
Mm-hmm. That's a great expectation. Now, one thing we haven't, we've glossed over, but your teaching and your instructional practice is very much data driven. You're using it consistently to differentiate, improve, and respond to your students' needs.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just do a brief discussion about how you do that, like managing data collection, screening measures, and progress monitoring measures within your classrooms?
Well, the easiest thing probably with intervention, because a lot of it is what you deal with, because you're dealing with kids that are sometimes tier 2 and maybe tier 3. Even in my school, someone probably a bit more tier 1, but that's another story. But anyway, so a lot of times at the beginning of the year, I will screen for, like I said, phonological awareness, phonics. So I still use a version of TPRI to screen for phonics for spelling or encoding. And then, oddly enough, Jan Richardson has a phonological awareness screener, like words of what levels the kids should be at, like based off what they should know at certain levels. So I actually use that, and it's pretty accurate. I've always used a lot of those words. And then, so I kind of set the kids at a phonics level. And that's been a pretty good guide the last couple of years. And then with fluency, of course, you got Dibble's vocabulary, you can use Map Growth. And I use my own screeners as well with that. And then with comprehension, you can use Map Growth, but sometimes you kind of already know what that is for the most part. And then, of course, you might see where they are at their reading level. But the main thing I want to see if it matches up. Because like I screened a kid earlier this year, she was supposedly a D at the end of the previous year. And then I screened her, she didn't know any of her letter sounds. And I'm like, that doesn't really, it's kind of like that type of thing. So and I had kids that supposedly didn't know this, but their reading level was up here. So that's why I like to screen them, because sometimes the stuff don't be accurate at all. So that's the whole reading level thing. So I screen them there, and then you build activities. I have a template that I look over each week, and I see if the kids are mastering certain skills. So say like I like to use targeted guided reading. So it's essentially what people call strategy groups. So I might use a guided reading book, but my only focus is learning, say, the elements of plot or character traits. It's not like, hey, I just get this book and ask a bunch of random questions, which effect size, I think, is 0.35 or something like that. I was thinking about that earlier today. So I would just teach that skill, and then I use RAS kids. So I might give the kids a quiz at the end of the week on a particular level, and that's what they would do. So a lot of times I would look at the data every week. And then, so say if I did word study, so if I'm teaching long, I would see how many words could they decode all the words and could they spell all the words, and how many they spell. And then I would actually do data collection based off of that. And so you can kind of see, like, I would look back and there's certain kids, like if they didn't master a skill, and you see them still struggling with it. So you kind of can tell that way. And I even get to the point where I get down to what phonics skill they're mastering and so on and so forth. So a lot of it is based off of that. But in the classroom, a lot of times you have assessments. I like giving quizzes every Friday. And then you kind of can tell, because I was telling one of our coaches at the end of the year, you should never get to whatever district assessment, benchmark, whatever, and be surprised as to what your kids do. So similarly, like I told you, my kids did 91% my second year teaching, But in the classroom, because it really should have been 92%. I had a student that came like at the end of November, which is like the cutoff mark or something like that. So she didn't count, but it would have been 92%. But my students did 92% every day in class for the most part on whatever quiz I gave. That's pretty much what they always did. So it was not a shock when they got 92%. So every day, I feel like everything should be appropriately rigorous to where you know what they're going to do. And then you can track it as the day. Now, a lot of people aren't, especially ELA teachers tend to not be data focused. That's a math thing normally. So like I said, it's typically you take that informal data, like class discussions, things like that. And some of that stuff you don't have to formally write down. But of course, quizzes you can. So some of it is just like paying attention to students and seeing how they're growing, how they're reading, how they're doing this. So a big thing is running records. I've never kind of gotten that. I was like, you can sit there and listen to kids read when you're doing, I guess some would call it shared reading. You can tell who's growing and who's not. You shouldn't have to do all that extra stuff and do MSV, none of the silly stuff. You normally can kind of tell, I feel like, if you're doing what you're supposed to do. So on a daily basis.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and you are the creator of the Phenomenal Student. If individuals are wanting to reach out to you and find out more.
Yes, please do. Definitely know you need a presentation or need a little help with any of the components of teaching literacy.